Esperamos que los temas que abordemos sean de gran interés para todos y sea un escenario para analizar la importancia de una minería bien hecha, fuente de progreso para nuestro país. Damos paso a nuestro primer punto en la agenda académica del día. Desde París, Francia, nos acompaña Burce Warlick, directora ejecutiva de la Agencia Nacional de Energía. Y damos también la más cordial bienvenida a Ricardo Ávila Pinto, analista del Tiempo, quien estará a cargo de liderar esta conversación.
Muchas gracias y muy buenas tardes a todos los presentes. Lamento no estar acompañándolos allá personalmente, pero por cuenta de la tecnología tengo el privilegio de conducir este conversatorio con la embajadora Burce Warlick desde París. Madam Ambassador, first allow me to say hello to you. If you give me a couple of minutes, I'm going to introduce you to the audience in Spanish, and we'll switch back to English in a minute. Quiero, en primer lugar, saludar a la embajadora Burce Warlick, quien es la directora ejecutiva delegada de la Agencia Internacional de Energía. Ella es una diplomática de carrera en uso de buen retiro del servicio exterior de los Estados Unidos. Fue embajadora en Serbia y ocupó durante su trayectoria con el gobierno estadounidense diferentes posiciones de liderazgo, tanto en el Departamento de Estado como en el Consejo de Seguridad Nacional, el Departamento de Defensa, sirviendo tanto en Washington como fuera de su país. Entre 2014 y 2017 se desempeñó como la delegada del Departamento de Estado y la enviada especial para temas internacionales de energía, representando también a su nación en la Junta Directiva de la Agencia Internacional de Energía. Graduada en Ciencia Política con una maestría en Derecho y Diplomacia, quiero darle la más cordial bienvenida. Quisiera simplemente señalar pues que vamos a tener traducción simultánea porque esta charla vamos a llevarla a cabo en inglés. De tal manera que, sin más preámbulo, vamos a comenzar con las preguntas porque el tiempo es limitado. Ambassador, now allow me to greet you and thanks again for being with us this morning in Cartagena in Colombia. And let me ask you the first question. The agency where you work at has been a promoter of energy transition and the gradual abandonment of fossil fuels. In order to face the challenge of global warming, how is this process being carried out in the world?
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to join you this morning. Let me say good morning, and it's a real pleasure to be able to speak with you, Ricardo, and all the participants in the conference today in Cartagena. Let me just start by saying you're absolutely right that many IEA members and partner countries have made net zero emissions pledges around the world. And this is, in fact, leading to a global realignment of energy and climate goals, a good thing. However, in this context, we have also pointed out that there is a growing gap between the rhetoric, that is the commitments of governments, and real action on the ground. And this gap needs to close if we want to maintain our chance of reaching net zero emissions by 2050 and limiting the rise in global temperatures to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Now, in order to achieve the highly ambitious goal of reaching net zero by 2050, last year we here at the IEA presented a global roadmap. And that roadmap identifies a set of very specific milestones that provide one possible global pathway to achieving net zero by 2050. And in our net zero emissions pathway, the world economy in 2030 is some 40% larger than today, but uses 7% less energy. And this results from an annual rate of energy intensity improvements averaging 4% to 2030. And this is about 3 times the average rate achieved over the last 2 decades, showing a very high level of ambition. Now, our pathway would also require scaling up solar and wind very rapidly this decade, quadrupling annual capacity additions during this decade. And for PV in 2030, for example, this is equivalent to installing the world's current largest solar park roughly every single day. So hugely ambitious. Now, every country we recognize will have to pursue and will want to pursue its own pathway to net zero in line with its specific local conditions and its own specific resource endowments. And in terms of global deployment of clean energy, most technologies and sectors are currently not on track, unfortunately, for achieving these global net zero pathway goals. Our annual Tracking Clean Energy Progress Report assesses the status of 46 critical energy technologies and sectors, and of a total of 46, only 2 technologies, namely electric vehicles and lighting, are currently on track for net zero by 2050. So there's a great deal of work to be done. Now, the rollout of renewables has continued at a fast pace, even during our recent COVID-related lockdowns, with strong growth set for years to come. But on the other hand, growth was not fast enough to keep pace with increased energy demand during 2021's last year's economic rebound, and a worrying amount of power demand had to be met by coal. And of course, this has been exacerbated even more recently this year by the Russian invasion of Ukraine and related sanctions on Russian gas, which have led to further increased coal use. Now, the decarbonization of sectors such as transport and buildings also is not happening fast enough to reach net zero goals. And there simply is not enough investment in the technologies of the future that are needed to complete the transition to a net zero future. So if I can just say in summary, governments will have to move much faster to implement the policies that they need that can put global emissions into sustained decline over the coming years.
Thank you, Ambassador. Second question, is it fair to say that in any case, according to your scenarios at the agency, by the middle of the century, fossil fuels will continue to be part of the energy matrix? Is that correct?
Well, in order to meet zero emissions targets by 2050 and to allow for some continued use of fossil fuels in the energy mix, a major deployment of carbon capture, use, and storage technologies will be required. And in our global net zero scenario, unabated coal demand must decline by 98%, gas demand by 55%, and oil by 75% through 2050. And we believe CCUS technologies can be applied across the energy system to capture CO2 from very large point sources, but they also provide the foundation for carbon removal or negative emissions when the CO2 comes from bio-based processes or even directly from the atmosphere. However, CCS technology development and deployment is lagging far behind, in particular in the crucial power sector. In fact, only one commercial power plant equipped with CCUS remains in operation today. So I think it's quite clear that CCUS must be a priority area for policy action to ensure sufficient progress with global energy transitions.
As you well know, Colombia is an exporter of oil and coal, which are the number one and number two items on our export of our exports. What should we do? Should we continue on that path?
Well, in the medium to long term, under a net zero by 2050 scenario, there will no longer be a large global market for coal. And it's not our place to tell Colombia necessarily what you should do in the way of next steps, but I think it's fair to say that it would be prudent to prepare for this situation, even though at the moment we are seeing high prices and demand as recovered temporarily. And as regards oil, the window of opportunity is starting to close as well. If we look again at the net zero by 2050 scenario, global oil demand also drops significantly by 2050. And while the decline for oil will take time, perhaps more time than other fuels, eventually the future for hydrocarbons in a net zero world will be significantly reduced.
In the context of this global trend towards net zero emissions, what should Colombia do then?
Well, the first point I'd like to make is that Colombia's own ambitious net zero by 2050 goal has already put your country in a globally leading position, and that's really very important. As you implement this vision, and that's the important piece of it, it will be really important to maintain the focus on achieving what we call a people-centered transition, which assures that no one is left behind in this transition process. We very much believe that Colombia is moving in the right direction by developing wind and solar energy, using new policy solutions, such as the two-way auction, and creative business models that can facilitate these investments as well. The developments of the past couple of years have shown the real attractiveness of renewables and that they're able to compete economically with traditional energy sources. I'd also note that in addition to this, Colombia has started to develop the potential of other sustainable technologies, such as hydrogen and CCUS, also very important for driving the transition process, which you will be able to deploy as they become more mature over time.
What are the main opportunities in the area of critical minerals for this energy transition, and what needs to happen for a country like Colombia to seize these opportunities?
Well, this is a really important topic, and thank you for raising it. In our view, the shift from traditional energy systems, which is fueled mainly by hydrocarbon resources, to clean energy systems comes with the shift in demand for raw materials. And it's really important to recognize that critical minerals such as copper, lithium, nickel, cobalt, and rare earth elements are going to be really essential components in many of today's and the future rapidly growing clean energy technologies. And we anticipate that the demand for these kinds of minerals will grow quickly as the clean energy transitions and investments and reliance on clean energy sources gather pace. The types of mineral resources used vary by technology, of course. Lithium, nickel, cobalt, manganese, and graphite are crucial to battery performance, for example. While rare earth elements are essential for permanent magnets that are used in wind turbines and electric vehicle motors. And electricity networks need a huge amount of copper and aluminum, with copper being a cornerstone for all electricity related technologies. So all of these minerals are going to be of a growing importance going forward. So right now, an important step is for policymakers to already beginning to provide clear signals about how their ambitious transition targets will be turned into action and how they can be implemented. And investors will need such signals in order to commit to new mining projects. So efforts to scale up investment in these kinds of minerals should really go hand in hand with a broad strategy that encompasses technology innovation, recycling, of course, supply chain resilience and sustainability, and environmental and social standards, which will really truly be important as well, will help ensure that we maintain globally the social license, the support from communities to operate. In our view, there's no shortage of resources worldwide, and there's truly are great opportunities for those who can produce minerals in a sustainable and responsible manner. But this is another area where no single country will be able to solve all of these complex issues alone. So strengthened international cooperation is essential, and this is very much an area where the IEA is going to be increasingly involved and looking to work with countries around the world. So I'll just close by saying we at the IEA are really, truly committed to helping governments, producers, and consumers all around the world tackle these critical challenges. And we truly look forward to working closely with Colombia in this regard as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Ambassador. Thank you. Burce Warlick speaking from Paris, the International Energy Agency. Thank you very much.
Thank
Muchas
you.
gracias a la embajadora. Muchas gracias a quienes nos han seguido. Yo quisiera simplemente subrayar algunos de los puntos importantes que ha hecho. En primer lugar, lo fundamental y lo inevitable que es el proceso de transición energética en el cual el mundo está inmerso, un proceso que no está avanzando necesariamente a la velocidad deseada para contener el aumento de temperaturas en el planeta, pero que indudablemente pues tiene que ser adoptado con seriedad. En ese tema, Colombia es un referente regional con metas particularmente ambiciosas y, como todos conocemos, las políticas de este nuevo gobierno de la administración Petro, como bien lo expresó la ministra de Minas en su intervención, están incorporadas o ajustadas a estos propósitos que comprenden reducir en 51% las emisiones adoptadas por la pasada administración para el año 2030 y ser carbono neutrales para el año 2050. En ese propósito, el hecho de que Colombia sea un gran productor de petróleo y de carbón, pues le pone presión al país en el sentido de hacer esa transición, teniendo en cuenta que este proceso de alejamiento gradual de los combustibles fósiles está teniendo lugar. Es verdad que por circunstancias puntuales como la guerra en Ucrania, esa transición encuentra obstáculos puntuales, pero también es absolutamente cierto que la amenaza del calentamiento global es real, como se expresa en tantas partes del mundo, incluyendo en nuestro país. Y en ese sentido quiero destacar lo que dice la embajadora sobre las posibilidades de los minerales de la transición energética y en particular del cobre, un mineral que, según las pesquisas realizadas hasta ahora en Colombia, tiene un inmenso potencial. Recordemos que en el cinturón del cobre pasa o comienza en el sur de América Latina y sube hasta el norte, y se encuentran yacimientos importantes tanto en Ecuador como en Panamá. En Colombia se hace una labor exploratoria que da indicios muy interesantes, y en ese sentido felicito a los promotores del Hub del Cobre, que debería incluir a todas las compañías que están en este proceso ¿Por qué? Porque no somos parte de la solución, no somos parte del problema, disculpen, sino somos parte de la solución en materia de transición energética, gracias a nuestro potencial en materia de cobre y ojalá de otros minerales que apoyen la transición energética. En ese sentido, resalto la trascendencia de las palabras que hemos escuchado. Ambassador, I'm sorry it took me so long to comment on the points you made, but I want to thank you again for taking the time to speak to us this morning, and I wish you a very pleasant afternoon in Paris. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bueno, y a todos los presentes, muchas gracias.
Bueno, muchísimas gracias de manera muy especial a la señora Burce Warlick desde París y a Ricardo Ávila por esta interesante conversación.